All right, welcome everyone to the Finely Tuned Infrastructure podcast brought to you by Rhythmic Technologies. I feel like a lot of folks out there are probably in the same boat we are, trying to really wrap our heads around this whole cybersecurity, maturity, model, servicification
Yeah,
thing.
CMMC.
CMMC, right. Especially as we get closer and closer to 2025. I mean, where do we even start with all this?
Well, luckily, we've got a pretty solid starting point for this deep dive. We're taking a close look at a blog post by Rhythmic Technologies, and it really hits on something important right away. This CMMC, it's a pretty big shift for anyone working with the Department of Defense, any DoD contractors out there.
Totally. I mean, I can already tell this is way more than just checking some boxes on a form, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's not just about saying you've got security measures in place. It's about actually proving they're doing their job and protecting all that sensitive information. That's a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. And that's actually what we're hoping to help with today. In this deep dive, we want to break down what this CMMC framework actually means, what's happening with it right now, and how people can actually get on board with it. Because, I mean, let's be honest, who really loves dealing with compliance stuff?
Right, exactly.
But the thing is, it's kind of got to get done. So hopefully we can make it a little easier to digest.
Definitely. So let's start with the basics. What's the whole point of CMMC? I mean, what issue is it even trying to tackle?
At its core, CMMC is all about setting a clear cybersecurity standard across the entire defense industrial base. Like, imagine it as a way to make sure that everyone the DoD works with, from the big guys to the smaller suppliers, has a solid level of security in place to protect sensitive data. Because, let's face it, that data flows throughout the entire supply chain. So it's kind of like raising the bar for everyone involved.
Gotcha. So it's about leveling the playing field and ensuring everyone's taking security seriously.
Exactly.
And this means actually putting specific security practices into action, right? The blog post mentioned something like 17 different capability domains. What are some examples of those?
Oh, there's a whole range of them. Some are pretty obvious, like controlling who has access to what information. But then there's things like incident response, like having a plan ready to go in case there's a security breach. And you've also got things like risk management, which is all about figuring out where the threats might come from and how to deal with them before they become a problem.
So it's not just about having a firewall, it's about the whole process, the policies, the training.
Exactly.
It's a complete picture of how an organization handles security, top to bottom.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, earlier you mentioned that CMMC is moving away from self-attestation.
Yeah, and that's a big one.
Why is that such a game changer? I mean, instead of just saying, hey, we're good, now you have to prove it, right?
Exactly. It's all about trust but verify, right? The DoD can't take a contractor's word for it anymore. They need actual proof that the security measures are not only in place, but actually working as intended. So for the higher CMMC levels, you need an independent audit by a third party. They come in, kick the tires, make sure everything's legit.
It's like having an independent inspector come in to make sure your house is up to code, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You can't just tell them the wiring is good. They got to see it for themselves.
Exactly, yeah. They got to see it.
Now, CMMC has these different levels of certification, level 1, 2, and 3. Can you walk us through the key points of each?
Okay, so level 1 is like the starting point. It's called Basic Cyber Hygiene. And it's all about protecting what's called Federal Contract Information, FCI for short. Basically, it involves putting 17 specific security practices in place, and these are actually laid out in something called ACAR Clause 52.204-21. It's a mouthful, but the main thing is you got to follow these practices. And to show you're doing that, you do an annual self-assessment and kind of affirm that you're in compliance.
So it's the foundational level for anyone handling that basic federal contract data, right?
Right.
And what about level 2?
Okay, level 2 is a step up. They call it Intermediate Cyber Hygiene. And this one's about protecting Controlled Unclassified Information, which they call CUI. This level brings in a whole bunch more requirements, 110 to be exact, from something called NIST Special Publication 800-171 Revision 2.
Whoa, okay, that's a big jump from 17.
Yeah, it definitely gets more complex. And for verification at level 2, it really depends on the specific contract. Sometimes a self-assessment might cut it, but other times you might need a full-blown certification assessment by a C3PAO.
A what now?
A C3PAO, which stands for Certified Third-Party Auditing Organization. Basically, these are the folks authorized to come in and give you the official stamp of approval.
Ah, okay, the independent inspectors we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. So level 2 is where things start to get serious.
Right.
And what about level 3?
Level 3 is the top tier, the big leagues. They call it good cyber hygiene. And this one's all about protecting against advanced persistent threats. Think of those as like the really sophisticated, determined attackers who are constantly trying to break in.
The hackers who just won't quit.
Exactly.
All right.
This level is especially important for really sensitive stuff like critical defense programs. And to get there, you got to already be at level 2, plus you got to meet even more requirements from another NIST publication, 800-172.
So it's level 2, but on steroids.
Yeah, kind of. And the verification for this one is done by the DIBC Act, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center.
Okay, another acronym. Is that a government agency?
It is, yeah, part of the Defense Contract Management Agency. So the key takeaway here is to really figure out what level you're going to need to be at. Not just what you think you need, but what your contracts are going to require. Because like we said, it gets way more complex and extensive as you go up the ladder.
Right, and it's probably better to figure that out sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Now, one thing that makes CMMC stand out from other security certifications, like those SOC 2 or ISO 27001 things, is that it's actually becoming part of the contract requirements themselves. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, think of it this way. With those other certifications, it's kind of like they're optional. You might get them to look good to clients or to stand out from the competition. But with CMMC, it's becoming a requirement just to get your foot in the door. You won't even be able to bid on certain DoD contracts if you're not compliant.
So it's not a nice to have anymore, it's a gotta have.
Exactly.
It's like the price of entry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to understand the seriousness of this. Now, the blog post mentioned something called POA&Ms.
Plans of action and milestones.
Yeah, what's the deal with those? Are they like a way to get around some of the requirements?
Well, sort of. They basically give organizations at levels 2 and 3 a little bit of breathing room. So if you get conditionally certified, but you've still got some gaps in your security, you've got up to 180 days to fix them. But, and this is important, POA&Ms don't fly at level 1. And even at the higher levels, you can't use them to put off implementing really crucial security stuff.
So they're not a free pass.
Definitely not.
You can't just say, oh, we'll get to that later. The expectation is that you've got the basics covered from the get-go.
Absolutely.
All right, now let's talk about where things stand right now. The blog post keeps mentioning 2025 is a big year for CMMC. What's the timeline looking like?
So right now we're in a bit of a transition phase. CMMC is in effect, but it's not mandatory for all DoD contracts just yet. But the Department of Defense has planned to release the final rules for federal contracting, that's Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, by summer 2025. And once that happens, CMMC is going to be everywhere.
So it's coming whether we like it or not.
Pretty much, yeah.
Better get ready. Now, what about those organizations that actually do the assessments for levels 2 and 3, the C3PAOs and the DIBCX, right?
Right. So as of right now, there are over 30 authorized C3PAOs out there. But here's the catch. They're getting slammed with requests. Tons of contractors are trying to get certified, and there's a huge backlog.
So it's like trying to get an appointment with a specialist. You might be waiting a while.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something to keep in mind if you think you'll need certification soon. It might take longer than you expect. And the same goes for those DIBCX assessments for level 3.
So even if you're ready to go, you might be stuck in line.
Exactly. And that can really mess with your chances of winning contracts.
Makes sense. The blog post also mentioned that they're expecting a ton of contractors to be level 2 certified by the end of the year. Why is that adding to the pressure?
Well, think about it. If a lot of your competitors are level 2 certified and you're not, you're going to be at a serious disadvantage when you're trying to land those DoD contracts.
So it's like everyone else is getting their driver's license and you're still stuck on a learner's permit.
Pretty much. Yeah. You want to be in the game, you got to get certified.
All right. So for a contactor out there who's aiming for level 2 compliance, what are some concrete steps they can start taking right now?
Okay. So first things first, they got to figure out where they stand. That means doing a thorough assessment of their current security practices against those 110 requirements from NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2.
So take stock of what you've got and what they're missing.
Exactly. And then they need to get really clear on how they handle Controlled Unclassified Information, the CUI. Which systems are storing it, processing it, transmitting it, that kind of stuff. Got to map it all out.
Get organized.
Yep. And then comes the real work. Implementing those technical security controls. We're talking about things like access management, making sure only the right people can get to the right data, system monitoring, keeping an eye on everything for any suspicious activity, and a solid incident response plan, just in case something does go wrong.
So building the walls, setting up the alarms, having a fire escape plan.
Exactly. And last but not least, they need to create clear security policies and procedures. Basically, a rule book that everyone follows.
And keep it updated.
Oh, absolutely.
Because things change all the time in the cybersecurity world.
All the time, yeah.
Now, since this is the Finely Tuned Infrastructure podcast presented by Rhythmic Technologies, let's talk about how Rhythmic actually helps organizations get through this whole CMMC process.
Okay, so Rhythmic's approach is all about building on a strong foundation. They leverage AWS, which already has something called FedRAMP authorization for its services, and that means it meets really high security standards. Plus, AWS comes with all these built-in tools for automation and monitoring that can really help with meeting CMMC requirements.
So they're not starting from scratch, they're building on a platform that's already secure.
Exactly.
Smart. And how does Rhythmic specifically help contractors achieve CMMC compliance on AWS?
They focus on architecting the infrastructure in a way that supports CMMC from the ground up. So they use things like infrastructure as code, which means managing infrastructure through code, and GitOps, which brings version control to operational workflows. They also use multi-account strategies and automated deployment pipelines on AWS so they can create these isolated environments that align with specific CMMC controls. And they leverage tools like AWS Systems Manager to manage configurations and compliance systematically.
So it's not just about slapping some security measures on top, it's about baking it into the infrastructure itself.
Right, and that's where the automation and the well-defined processes come in.
The blog post also talked about continuous monitoring and security maintenance. How does Rhythmic approach that, especially in the context of CMMC?
They really focus on understanding the normal behavior of a system, like its rhythm, so they can spot even tiny changes that might signal a security problem or a compliance issue. And to do that, they use advanced visualization tools, dashboards, and application performance monitoring. Basically, they give you a really clear picture of what's happening with your security and performance.
So it's not just about reacting to big, obvious alarms.
No, it's about being proactive and catching things early.
Got it.
And they work closely with engineering team to make sure they're collecting the right data from all the different parts of the infrastructure.
So everyone's on the same page.
Right. And they set up these layered security alerts with specific thresholds so they can detect anomalies and trigger responses based on CMMC requirements.
It's like having a whole team of security guards watching your systems 24/7.
Pretty much.
And they're constantly refining the monitoring systems to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And they also help develop detailed incident response plans and documentation, including security runbooks and operational procedures that are tailored to maintaining compliance, even if something does go wrong.
So they're not just setting you up and walking away, they're helping you to stay compliant over the long haul.
Exactly. It's a partnership.
Now, the blog post ended by emphasizing the need for infrastructure that's built for both compliance and sustainability. What's the big takeaway you want listeners to walk away with?
The main thing is that CMMC is a big change for the defense industrial base. It's not enough to just have security policies written down somewhere. You got to actually put them into practice and prove they're working. And when those mandatory requirements coming up fast and those C3PAO assessments getting booked up, the time to start getting ready is now.
No time to waste.
Nope.
Well, this has been a really informative deep dive into CMMC compliance. And as a reminder to our listeners, this has been an AI-generated podcast. For the original info, head over to rhythmictech.com/blog and check out the blog post.
And one last thought for you all to chew on. As cyber threats get more and more sophisticated and cybersecurity rules keep changing, how important do you think continuous monitoring and automation are going to become for staying compliant and secure in the long run?
Lots to think about there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time on the Finely Tuned Infrastructure podcast brought to you by Rhythmic Technologies.